So this is going to be a change of topics. I'm also fascinated by the role of technology in society, but my area is strategy and applications of new digital technology for strategic advantage. Now, as you can tell from my title, I'm interested in innovation, and in particular in crowdsourcing. Now, how many of you have heard of crowdsourcing for innovation? Now, how many of you have used any of the products that were designed and developed from crowdsourcing? Not so many, just a few, maybe a t-shirt here and there. I'm actually going to put it out to you that every single one of you has used a product that was developed through crowdsourcing. And that product is a tin can. You may not know this, but in 1795, French government, during the Napoleonic Wars, made a public call for anybody to come up with a method for preserving food at long distances. Napoleon needed to go on long marches. He needed a way of preserving food. And somebody came up with an idea of the glass canned jar. Now people have made additional investment, and by 1810, a tin can was invented. So what this little example indicates is that open innovation and even crowdsourcing, public calls for people to address large societal problems, are not that new. But the problems associated with engaging in such activities are not new either. This is another fascinating example from the history. Even before the Napoleon, royalty of all types, from Spanish kings to British monarchs, tried to address this problem. Shipwrecks often happened because navigators could not determine longitude at sea. It was one of the biggest challenges in navigation in the 16th, 17th, and in this case, 18th century. In 1714, British government sets up a board of longitude. This board is composed of this learned men, often scientists and astronomers. And the reason it's set up in 1714 is because this is a time of Isaac Newton, and there are advancements in science that suggest that finally the problem of longitude at sea could be solved. So anybody who solves this problem would be awarded 20,000 pounds. This is equivalent to a few $1 million in today's money. It's a huge prize. It takes, and everybody in this board believes that the solution would come from science, advances in calculus, astronomy, and physics. Except that one of the leading developers of the solution is a carpenter and a clockmaker called John Harrison. You might have heard the story. He basically says if you can invent a very precise clock which does not change due to humidity, temperature, and vibration of the ships, you can actually measure longitude precisely. It takes him 47 years to invent such a device. But the problem is when he actually creates a very well-working device, this board composed of learned scientists doesn't believe him, right? It's not a scientific solution. It's this precise clock. So this is the Harrison chronometer, which ended up solving the problem. But after he submitted a fully working solution that has been tested on multiple trips to the Caribbean, he does not get the prize for another 11 years until finally King George III intervenes on his behalf and says he deserves the prize. He was 80 years old. Many of us are not going to live long enough to see the prizes finally awarded. Why I like this example, if you ever heard a talk on crowdsourcing, probably heard this example. It's a very popular one. The reason I like telling this story is because it highlights one of the biggest challenges we have today in crowdsourcing open innovation. And that challenge is evaluation. When you open up the company boundaries, you're buying into this idea that innovation comes from diversity. If you go on Amazon.com and type in innovation management, this is the list of books you're going to get, more or less. There is a new one coming out every year, but the ideas are very similar across all of these books. Look at this, biomimicry. The idea is you can take ideas in biology and apply them to your current technological engineering problems. The Medici effect. What's the Medici effect? It's connecting people with diverse expertise or arts and technology. Da Vinci is famous for connecting technology and arts together. This is my favorite if you ever pick one to read. This is by Andy Hargadon, How Breakthrough Happens. He studies the lives of Tom Edison and Henry Ford and shows how the innovations that these people are famous for were embedded in a network of social relations that allowed these brilliant people to connect diverse ideas together. So the age of open innovation, and the way it's been defined by Henry Chesbrough, who sort of made this concept very prominent in today's business, is due to the fundamental belief that companies innovate when they tie ideas previously unconnected together. So for that, they explore not only internal ideas, but also external ideas and external pathways to market, like Apple and Google do with their apps, allowing to opening up their platforms for external innovation. But when we are looking at the question of how we source these external ideas, nowadays we turn to crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing is not the same as open innovation. Sometimes people mix this up. You can be crowdsourcing very simple vanilla tasks. Anybody heard of Amazon Mechanical Turk? So there, people are labeling pictures and tagging words. This is not innovation. There are websites where you can sort of ask people to translate text for you. That's not innovation. It's crowdsourcing, but not innovation. So what the idea of crowdsourcing is basically taking jobs that were previously done internally and making public open calls for anybody. A dog could do it sort of on the internet, right? Nobody knows. Making public open calls for somebody to do it. You can use it for innovation, but the same problems I mentioned from centuries ago of how you, on one hand, open up your boundaries so as to invite the breadth of ideas. On the other hand, don't use the same narrow judgment to reject every single novel idea. This problem is going to be there, whether you crowdsource or engage with alliances. IT has basically fueled the growth of crowdsourcing models. So this is a chart that basically shows quite clearly that at the beginning we started with some simple cases where people just put out projects, little projects for bid on places like Elance and Rent-A-Coder. Then Innocentive, a site I'm going to talk a little bit more about next, came up. And that's more of a crowdsourcing for innovation. And what you see, obviously, on the right-hand side is that this has been growing like mushrooms. I'm willing to bet that maybe every week we have a new idea for how to crowdsource something. And this is wonderful. We have this engine of innovation in our society. But at the same time, I'm venturing to say that only few of those experiments will prove successful. So what it is that can guide companies who experiment in this space? So Innocentive, as I mentioned, was one of the pioneers. How many of you have heard of Innocentive.com? Just a few. So Innocentive is a website that was launched by a couple of biotech executives sort of working for pharma companies who figured out that there are people out there with diversity of expertise who could solve difficult technical problems that companies cannot solve themselves. Well, I like this example because basically what this is asking somebody to do is to invent this dream technology. So think of your 20th high school reunion, right? Wouldn't you want to have a polymer that you can put on your skin to look 20 years younger? And all that, for some reasonable price, that you can buy it in your local CVS store. And by the way, if you have such technology, you should show that it works. The reduction to practice challenge on an incentive is a kind of challenge where you actually have lab results in a working prototype. So it's not very difficult, as I read about this, to invent such a polymer. What's really difficult is to invent one that doesn't kill your skin cells while it's making you look 20 years younger. Now, how many of you, if you had an idea of how to do this, would give it up for 30 grand? I don't see a single hand. Yes, anybody? So this kind of challenge makes you think, like, what are they thinking about? Who's going to give it up? We're going to go to L'Oreal and sell it for a few million, because this is probably $1 billion market if you really invent something like this. So oftentimes, these kinds of challenges are targeting people who have no other way of developing technologies they came up with. Often these are people located in geographies that don't have access to venture capital. But some of the problems people have posed there are simply engaging people with access, time, and talent who are not interested in commercial profit as much. So who are the kinds of people who have extra time deep expertise, and not so much into commercializing. Exactly, retirees. A good number of problems that have been solved here have been solved by retirees. In fact, I had an MBA student in my class who, when I talked about an incentive, mentions that his father is on an incentive as a retired PhD from a biotechnology company. So incentive is one way of doing crowdsourcing. The main idea of this site is to attract people with a broad expertise, but not necessarily the users. Now, it's unlikely that somebody who wants to use this polymer also is able to invent it. Majority of crowdsourcing for innovation taps into the idea of user-driven innovation or lead user innovation. So probably one of the most famous successful example of this is Lego, enabling its lead users to engage in new product design. They want to do it. They're interested already in Lego and its products. The product itself, Lego sets, fairly decomposable, right? Almost literally decomposable. You can take it down to pieces. So it's an ideal case of when you can engage users, you give them software to enable them to do those designs, and you get huge variety of innovative products. So Lego has been an exemplar company. But companies engage in innovation crowdsourcing in very different ways. How many of you have heard of P&G crowdsourcing? That's one of the companies on the forefront. There is one hand there. Well, Huggies, Kimberly-Clark rather, the producer of Huggies, is a competitor of P&G. But it doesn't have sort of the scale and the scope and the culture that P&G has towards engaging broadly with every type of open innovation, from an incentive down to co-invention. So what it did is consistent with the philosophy it has. The key users for Huggies are moms, right? So like, I'm a mom, I know what Huggies are, what they're supposed to do. But moms often have ideas for baby products that may not necessarily be on the market. So what they have done is they say, well, instead of, say, asking people to invent better diaper, which requires at least a PhD in chemistry or chemical engineering, because it's a very advanced process, why don't we ask our moms, our user community, to suggest product inventions, and we will have basically a venture capital fund which will invest in some of those. So this is like this little thing called aqueduct. Anybody who has kids can relate to this. My kids could never reach the water. So you give them a little something that helps them reach the water, you make them better off. The reason I highlight these very, very different examples is because we have huge variety of ways in which companies engage, and nobody yet knows what the right way is, and I don't know if there will be a day when we'll learn it, but for now, everybody is experimenting. The problems, though, are numerous. So as I said with the Harrison chronometer, there are many, many issues that pop up. First is problem formulation. How do you even put it out there, the problem you're trying to solve, without revealing very important intellectual property information? Oftentimes, you reveal to your competitors what you're working on is quite sensitive and important. Solution generation. Think about this polymer. Imagine it's L'Oreal. We don't know who the people are who posted. Chances are extremely high that before ever posting anything like this on an incentive, company has invested millions of R&D dollars solving this problem themselves. They probably have tried a number of solutions and know what doesn't work and which pathway gets you closer. Now, they cannot put it all out there on this website, not only because there is IP sensitivity, but also because the solvers could not be expected to spend hours and hours going through this data and learning things. It's too much time investment for a small chance of winning a small prize. So the next problem, as I said, solution evaluation. People usually who pose the problem and judge it have very narrow, it's not that they're bad, they're often excellent scientists, but they come to the evaluation with the same rather narrow set of expertise that wasn't able to solve the problem in the first place. And finally, even if you get to the stage where you were able to get wonderful solutions, you may still have a company that needs to invest significant amount of resources into adopting the solution into practice. Very rarely you get a ready working proven result. You usually get an idea and then there is huge investment required to test it out. So what can guide experiments that companies do when they engage in crowdsourcing. So some of the stuff I'm going to share with you come from the research of my collaborator Karim Lakhani at Harvard, and some of the other studies we've done at NYU here with my collaborators Enlo Fayard and Manas Giridakis. So first thing first, you can start talking about some parameters that makes this easier rather than harder. When a problem is decomposable, you can put pieces of it out there for others to engage in, and it's a good candidate for open innovation. You can argue that in something like an airplane, there is an engine, and there is a wing, and there are seats and materials, and it's a decomposable problem. Well, with Boeing Dreamliner, turns out that it's not so easy to figure out what's truly decomposable and what's not. As you know, it had a ton of problems because it has decided to do too much open innovation. But still, with complex products like this, you can decompose pieces compared to something like that, where basically if you tell somebody to design a spout and another crowdsourcing participant to design a handle, you're unlikely to get something quite as beautiful as this teapot. The other aspect to think about is the nature of solution knowledge. Do you believe that the solution knowledge to your problem is widely distributed? So, for example, how many of you have heard of Frog Design consultancy? So Frog Design is an elite design consultancy firm, but it created a crowdsourcing platform called Frog Mob to help them do some research. All they're saying is, if you have a camera, you can help us do research, in this case, for example, on your cupboards. Give us all the pictures of your pantries. Give us all the pictures of touchscreen cameras, devices. So it's anybody with a camera has a variety of things they observe. So this is a good candidate for crowdsourcing because the solution knowledge is distributed. You can compare this to something like plant optimization. The knowledge is very concentrated with a few people and very embedded in the organization. Another aspect of this is nature of the evaluation knowledge. Anybody heard of threadless t-shirt designs? Right. So threadless taps into the notion that it's better to have a whole large group community of people evaluating whether the t-shirt's going to sell than to, say, have a small focus group like the traditional retail stores. So the evaluation knowledge is distributed. However, you compare this to NASA, which engaged with an incentive for all sorts of scientific problems. They believe the solution knowledge is widely distributed. But hey, you don't want to ask the crowd whether it's really possible to use this product in space. The evaluation knowledge is truly with NASA. So just to review, from extant research and innovation, we know that some of the parameters are the nature of the problem and how widely distributed or concentrated is the solution and evaluation knowledge. But let's look at this example really briefly. Some of you might have heard of Dell creating this crowdsourcing platform called IdeaStorm. Dell IdeaStorm is a website where Dell is inviting its lead users, people who are engaged with Dell products, to make suggestions about new features, what should go into the new release, what kind of laptops they should have. Anybody heard of Apple IdeaStorm? Anybody? Well, this is Apple IdeaStorm, right? This is Steve Jobs and a small group of elite designers and technologists coming up with the products. As anybody who read his biography has seen, it's a very closed process. And in fact, anybody who wants to make a suggestion for Apple would have very hard time finding a place to put this suggestion, right? What this is suggesting is this is the same product, a laptop. Same exact product. Dell and Apple compete in the laptop space, as we see here. Why is one company engaging its users and the other one is not? We've been looking at this from multiple industries. And what we find is at the end of the day, what drives the question of how companies engage with these experiments when there is no set rules for what's going to work and what's not going to work is heavily shaped by companies' philosophy. Companies have diverse philosophies, diverse beliefs about where knowledge comes from and where novelty comes from. They don't share the same approach. A design firm like Frog Designs, Merrick B, or IDEO is another firm you might have heard about, marketing firms, they believe often in the power of brainstorming. Many people, deep observations of user needs or consumer demands, come together, they brainstorm. How many of you, by the way, subscribe to this notion that good ideas come from lots of minds together, brainstorming lots of ideas, and then people listening and evaluating and prototyping? I do. So then we have seen also more like engineering mentality. Firms basically enact beliefs that say good innovation comes from correct problem formulation, good decomposition towards root causes of the problem, and then solving sub-problems by looking, for example, at solutions across from different domains. Now, this is not anti-open innovation. This is just different philosophy. In this case, you're not going to ask the crowd to do this. This is crazy. You need a lot of embedded knowledge. But you might ask the crowd to solve those problems at the branches where you know exactly what you want. And we also have seen like a philosophy that we call broadcast search philosophy, basically saying 2 minds are better than 1 and millions of minds are better than 2, as long as we get lots of submissions, like in incentives philosophy is like this. We're going to solve it. Remember, in crowdsourcing, nobody needs to know, like the average solution doesn't have to be good. All you want is that 1% to be useful. You can throw away everything else. So broadcast search is the idea that if you search widely enough, you're going to find it. So just to give you an example, IDEO built an open IDEO crowdsourcing platform. Unlike Frog Design, it actually has every single stage of innovation following design thinking process that IDEO is famous for. And then any one of you can go and tomorrow sign up to innovate from A to Z, all the way to prototyping and implementation through this platform. So to conclude, what did we learn? There are some good guidelines in this innovation and strategy research for how to engage with these experiments. But what our research indicates is that there are no standards yet, and that companies who do it well understand philosophically where they're coming from and engage in the kinds of experiments that are consistent with their beliefs about novelty and knowledge, so that when they get this brilliant solution like Harrison chronometer, they have an ability to understand it, because the way they set it up is inclusive of the kinds of ideas they're expecting to get. Thank you.